Our next presenter is a professor in the Department of Gender Studies at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. He holds a BA in Religious Studies from Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas, an MA in Women's and Gender Studies from Roosevelt University in Chicago. I almost went there. And a PhD in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies with honors from the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas. His teaching and research are rooted in the feminist studies with a specific focus on sexuality, queerness, trans politics, and race. His current project examines the pervasive influence of eugenics on the original diagnosis of gender deviance. One of his favorite things about being in academia is teaching and working with students. More specifically, he loves collaborating with students in the interest of understanding and articulating how feminism can be transformative for all of us, regardless of gender, sexuality, race, or any other aspect of who we are in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to please welcome Dr. Liam Lair, everybody.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm really excited to share a little bit of my story with you. So I want to talk about being trans. I am trans, or transgender might be a word that you're more familiar with. So what does that mean? Many of you may not know. So I was assigned female at birth, and I lived the first 28 years of my life as a woman. And I want to sort of make a caveat before I get into my story a little bit more, that I don't think we have access to a lot of trans stories or trans narratives. That's starting to change. So what I'm going to share with you is my story and no one else's, right? I'm going to talk about living my life as a woman, and that is something that is central to who I am. I would never give that up for the world, right? It shaped how I understand myself, how I understand my politics. But there's a lot of trans people that you might meet moving forward that aren't as comfortable talking about that the gender they were assigned at birth isn't something that feels safe for them or feels comfortable. So I just want to make that caveat. So, I'm trans. I didn't start identifying as trans until I was in my late 20s, early 30s. I'm 36 now, I think. Yes, 36. I stopped counting after 30, I don't know. So I started identifying as trans in my late 20s, and previous to that, I had been living as a gay woman. I came out as a gay woman when I was 21 in undergrad at Texas Christian University, and that was the first time that I had really started coming into my own as far as being a woman, right? And it was the first time I had to redefine what womanhood was for me. Up until that point, I had sort of assumed and connected heterosexuality or being straight with being a woman. That's what we're taught, that those are synonymous, right? And so I redefined womanhood for myself for the first time. After I finished undergrad, I moved up to Chicago basically as quickly as I could. I loved Texas, it was great, I made some good friends, but I got out really quickly, moved up to Chicago, and that was the first time that I was presented with the possibilities of being a woman and what that meant for me. Right? I had never been particularly feminine. I tried really hard to be feminine. I wasn't very good at it. I even was in 2 sororities. I was like, gung-ho feminine. I was in a Christian sorority and a Pan-Hellenic sorority. Neither of those really worked out for me. But I was also never really very masculine. And so moving to Chicago and meeting women who were living out womanhood in really different ways and being androgynous and becoming androgynous myself was incredible, right? Not only separating straightness from womanhood, but separating femininity from womanhood. And for the first time in my life, I was comfortable being a woman. And it was the best, right? And it wasn't until my late 20s that I knowingly met trans people. And I say knowingly because I think most of us in this room have probably met or talked with trans people. But there's this assumption that we know who's trans and who isn't. If I hadn't told you I was trans, most of you probably wouldn't know. Well, maybe the talk of my talk may have sort of clued you in a little bit. But you wouldn't have known. And so there's this assumption that we know who's trans, right? So most of you have probably talked with folks. You maybe have even used the restroom with folks that are trans, and everyone is just fine, right? All the guys in the room, right? Downstairs, who knows? But I knowingly met trans people for the first time. And again, this whole world of possibilities opened up for me, of how I could live in the world differently, right? And it was incredible. It was a transformative time for me. And there wasn't any one moment where I knew I was trans. Right? It was a series of small decisions. I changed my name. I started using male pronouns, so he and him instead of she and hers. Eventually I decided to take testosterone, which is why I look like a dude and I have a deep voice and I have a beard. I also lost my hair, which was a total bummer. I had really good hair before I took testosterone. But that was the hardest decision for me. When I was a gay woman, I was very androgynous. I was super gay, right? No one questioned that. No one asked me if I had a boyfriend, and I loved it. I loved being visible. I loved people knowing that I was gay. I loved walking down the street and like seeing other gay folks, and we'd sort of give each other the head nod like, you're gay, I'm gay, what's up? It was awesome. It was incredible, right? And I knew if I took testosterone, I would pass as a man, as a white man. And I didn't know what that meant for me. Obviously, I decided to take testosterone. I also wanted to be a little bit stronger, which I also got, which was fun. But that was sort of the last big decision I think I made. But this whole journey for me, right, was being, again, exposed to possibilities of experiencing gender in the world in a different way. And realizing that gender can be complicated and confusing, but can also be fun and exciting and evolving, right? Who I am today as a trans person is radically different from who I was 5 years ago as a trans person. And I hope in 5 more years, I'll be even different again, right? But having fun with gender, right? Painting my nails, piercing my ears. Those weren't things that I did as a woman. I didn't feel comfortable doing those things as a woman. But as a man, or someone who looks like a man, I could play with gender in different ways. I could access femininity in different ways, right? And it was incredible. So why does this matter to you, right? Why is this trans guy up here talking about his stuff? So Janet Mock, who is an incredible activist, trans woman, she's a journalist, her book is on sale over here, it's called Redefining Realness. She talks about how we need more trans people's stories, right? That telling our stories can be revolutionary. Too often our stories are met with violence, right? 8 or 9 trans women of color this year have been murdered for being trans. Last year, more than 20 trans women of color in this country were murdered for being trans. So our stories are met with violence, right? And that's not something, as someone who is white, someone who looks like a man, I don't have to worry about that as much, because I'm not experiencing transphobia at the intersection of racism. I'm not experiencing transphobia at the intersection of classism. But our stories are too often met with violence. However, our stories can also create community and can create inclusivity. And that's why I was asked here today, to talk about ways we can make St. Ben's and St. John's more inclusive, right? Not only those institutions, but well beyond the walls of those institutions. And so I'm here to ask you, what are you gonna do, right? To change the world, to make life better for folks that are not normatively gendered, right? Who are trans or gender nonconforming or non-binary or any host of different gender identities, right? Because I think my liberation and liberation for folks like me is tied up with your own. And what do I mean by that? So you can volunteer with national organizations, and I absolutely encourage that. If you Google trans rights, you'll find tons of organizations that are doing really amazing work across the country. But what I'm talking about in terms of liberation for me and how it's tied to you is recognizing that I'm not the only person with gender in this room, right? Every single one of you has gender. We've all learned our gender from probably before we were even born, right? And we've also learned the restrictions based on that gender. What you're supposed to do or not do as a woman, what you're supposed to do or not do as a man, right? And I want to challenge you all to expand the possibilities for your own genders, right? So men, be vulnerable, cry, wear pink, right? Paint your nails. I think it's fabulous, that's just me. Don't police each other's behavior. Support work against gender-based violence, right? We so often frame violence against women as a women's issue, even in the phrasing, violence against women. It's a men's issue, right? 98 to 99% of perpetrators are men. Fight for gender-based violence, fight against it, right? For women, be confident, take charge, build each other up, don't call each other names, redefine beauty, right? Separate body size from health. Those are not synonymous, despite what the media tells us over and over and over again. And this is gonna be incredible. This can be incredible for you and those in your community, and especially for those of you who have kids or wanna have kids, this can be transformative for them, right? Thousands of trans people were surveyed across the nation. 42% of them had attempted suicide at some point in their life. 94% of that group had done so before the age of 25, right? We're not giving our kids possibilities for how they can be gendered people in the world. And I think we can live out these multiple and endless possibilities of gender and find liberation and freedom in that. And for anyone in the room, and for those of you watching, anyone who's trans or gender nonconforming or questioning your gender, I want you to know that I see you, there are people who love you, there are people who care for you, and you're not alone. And I want to end, there's a poster that hangs on my wall in my office, and it's adapted from a poem by a woman named Nancy Smith, and I want to end, I've tweaked it a little bit for tonight, it's not the entire thing, but I want to share this all with you. For every woman who is tired of acting weak when she is strong, there is a man tired of appearing strong when he feels vulnerable. For every man who is burdened with the constant expectation of knowing everything, there is a woman tired of people not trusting her intelligence. For every woman who is tired of being called oversensitive, there is a man who fears to be gentle, to weep. For every man for whom competition is the only way to prove his masculinity, there is a woman who is called unfeminine when she competes. For every man struggling not to let advertising dictate his desires, there is a woman facing the ads industry attack on her self-esteem. For every person who takes a step towards expanding gender possibilities, there are so many others like myself who find ways to freedom a little bit easier. Thanks, y'all.